Our defense analyst. Oubai, these threats have been talked about for at least a week now, and the Americans are using it as justification to make all sorts of different moves, which all point towards pressure being placed on Iran. But how credible really are the threats that the Pentagon's been talking about?
Well, we're looking at three eyes here: the intelligence, Iran, and Iraq. First, Secretary of State Pompeo's surprise visit to Baghdad came on the heels of this reported intelligence that the U.S. military and the U.S. intelligence community received on what they believe is a heightened Iranian military posture in the Arabian Gulf and in Iraq. We do know, according to reports, that Secretary Pompeo warned his Iraqi counterparts in Baghdad to keep these Iraqi militias in Iraq that are supposedly beholden to Iran at bay, or the U.S. will take action. Now, all this chain of events began on May 3rd when U.S. Central Command believed that the threat from Iran via its proxy forces was significantly escalated. Now, there's, of course, a heightened debate within Washington and amongst Washington's allies, between the White House, between the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency, and, of course, the U.S. allies and Iraqi officials. Some do not believe that these intel reports are that significant. They believe that this may be Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards taking a more defensive posture. Of course, there are others in the U.S. defense establishment in Washington that believe that this could perhaps be signs that Iran is moving missiles near where U.S. forces are positioned in Iraq for a potential attack or a retaliatory attack against U.S. military and diplomatic assets. Now, of course, we saw the partial evacuation of U.S. diplomats from its embassy in Baghdad and from a consulate in northern Iraq. Whether or not this is a result of actionable intelligence is still up to a fierce debate, but we do know, according to the New York Times, that some of this intelligence seems to have stemmed from what the Americans believe to be our Iranian missiles loaded on small ships in the Arabian Gulf that could hit U.S. commercial vessels. That, of course, has spooked Washington. Both sides are on the edge. On the precipice, perhaps, Baghdad finds itself stuck between Iraq and the hard place. Of course, it still receives a significant amount of U.S. military assistance, and there are strong ties and commercial ties between Baghdad and Iran. So Iraqi officials now find themselves in a very tricky geopolitical and diplomatic position. Whether or not this could lead to war between the U.S. and Iran, another big question.
Okay, but that is the question, right? You pose it yourself. We're living in an age of misinformation and disinformation. Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iraq's foreign minister, Iran's foreign minister, said a couple of days ago, I told you that the Americans were going to invent some kind of situation. And that could be an allusion to what's happened with those alleged attacks on Saudi vessels and foreign vessels around the Middle East. Iran says it's part of psychological warfare. It wants an investigation into those particular incidents. Do you really see any possibility? Iran is a nation state. A terrorist organization may launch an attack against an American military unit, but why would Iran do something like that? It can only backfire against Tehran, surely.
Indeed, and perhaps this could also be a response or a measure of an internal debate in Iran itself. Of course, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, have their own power base. And in many instances, we see Qasem Soleimani in Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, leading Iran's foreign policy in that regard, while perhaps the diplomatic corps in Tehran is firewalled from these special operations. Of course, Qasem Soleimani and their American military have been at loggerheads and fighting each other since at least 2006 in Iraq via proxy warfare. And that seems to be the name of the game, proxy warfare, in a post-Daesh scenario where Daesh has been effectively neutralized in Iraq and Syria. You see these American military forces in very proximate locations to Iranian militias and Iranian-backed militias. Will the center hold, and for just how long, or will diplomatic efforts and cooler heads prevail at the end? We've seen the response from President Trump. He is not eager to get involved in the Iraq-style invasion, hundreds of thousands of U.S. forces on the ground, although some may be itching for a fight both in Tehran and in Washington.
Sure. Oubai, thank you very much indeed. Oubai Shahbandar, our defense analyst.